Hi, Jeff Ganz here, and you're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. Do it. It's great.
Welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. You know, a lot of people think they're too old or it's too late for them to learn how to play an instrument. So I created ForBassPlayersOnly.com for people over 50 who want to learn bass, because I believe you're never too old and it's never too late to experience the joy and the pleasure of making music. ForBassPlayersOnly.com. That's what we are all about. We've got a really, really special guest this week, Jeff Ganz. And, you know, I've been doing this a long time. I've interviewed just about 800 bass players, but with
That's it?
I'm not sure where to start, because the things that he's done and the people that he's played with are all over the map. So I'll introduce you in a second, Jeff, but I want to say to the audience, see if you can somehow connect these names into something cohesive. Jeff has worked with Rita Moreno, Johnny Winter, Roy Buchanan, The Village People, Jerry Mulligan, Lou Reed, Laurie Anderson, the Mamas and the Papas, Ben Vereen, Tito Puente, Larry Coryell, Eddie Money, Marvin Hamlisch, and on and on. So there's no common denominator that I can find. So let's see what we can dig out of him. Hello, Jeff Ganz. How are you?
Great, John. How are you? And thank
great.
you so much for asking me to come aboard. I mean, you do really fabulous work, and I'm really pleased you asked me to be part of this.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm excited to have you as well. All that stuff that I mentioned. Oh, by the way, Jeff has also played a bunch of Broadway shows and big time national TV commercials and on, electric, upright, and all kinds of numbers of strings on his basses. But I want to get to all that. But why don't we just start from the beginning? I know you were born in Washington, D.C. You moved to New York when you were 13. Tell me about your musical upbringing and how you became a bass player.
Well, as far as Washington, D.C. is concerned, I should definitely take the opportunity to mention to you my best friend in first and second grade, Mike Stern.
I love Mike.
And we've actually been in touch. I mean, what happened was I didn't know, we fell out of touch for billions of years. And for a while, I was studying with Jeff Andrews. May he rest in peace. And, monster, as we all know. And he mentioned he was doing a gig with this guitar player named Mike Stern at the 55 bar.
55.
So I go and I find an issue of Guitar Player that he's in. And I'm thinking, no, it can't be the same guy. So there I see, born in Washington, D.C., blah, 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 blah. And I went, whoa, it very well could be. Went down there and it was absolutely him. And about 3 years ago, I was in LaGuardia Airport, and so was he. So was Mike and Laney. So we had a great reunion and a great hug fest then. And the funniest part of the whole thing is that when he was walking away with Laney, they had to go pick up an Uber or whatever. He's Mike Stern, and one of the greatest living musicians. And I hear him say to Laney, "He played with Johnny Winter, man." And I'm like, oh, wow,
That's very cool. I've met him. I interviewed him once, actually. I have a site called ForGuitarPlayersOnly.com.
Okay.
And this was shortly after his accident. He stepped into the street or whatever it was. He gave me all the details. And his album that was inspired by was called Trip.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Jesus. Yeah. But not dissimilar to the Les Paul incident where he had his hand healed in a position where he could play, as did Les, after an injury. Am I right about that? I'm not sure.
You know what? I may have heard about that or read about that a long, long time ago. That sounds kind of familiar about Les, but I don't know. But it's funny. I was going to mention Mike Stern because I was going to mention Jeff Andrews. I saw them actually at that club. There were two clubs called 55. The 55 Club 55. I guess they were two with very similar names. You know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. There was 55 Grand.
Okay.
Which was 55 Grand Street, and that's where Jocko would play a lot.
Okay.
with the multi-mentioned Jocko. He would play there a lot with Delmar Brown,
Wow.
who passed not long, Kenwood Denard. I mean, and he would play at 55 as well. I mean, there's plenty of YouTube documentation of that.
Sure. But with the one that Mike often played at, what was called the 55
bar, which
55
was 55 Christopher Street, and 55 Grand was 55 Grand Street. Not that far from each other. 55 bar was in the West Village, and 55 Grand was in Soho, so slightly south of that.
I saw Mike Stern at the 55 bar with Jeff Andrews and one of my favorite drummers, Adam Nussbaum.
Boy, you got that right. I'll never forget my friend Ray Marchica and I, another superb drummer. We played with Roy Buchanan together. We did a lot of other things together on Broadway and off Broadway. And we all went to see Michael Brecker I think Jeff Andrews was the bass player, as a matter of fact. And it was the old location of Fat Tuesdays. And Adam Nussbaum is not only being a superb hang, because we have hung a bit, with some other drummers, Mike Berkowitz, Warren Oates. I don't know if you know these New York names, but, Tim Herman, the great drum guru. We would all go out for burgers and just, hang as guys. But Adam Nussbaum groove. He's one of those guys, and as a bass player, I'm sure you'll understand what this is, that makes you sound better than you are.
I always think of that's the bass player's job, is to make other people sound good.
Well, there's certain drummers that I've played with in my life that just wait a minute, I didn't know I could do this. And Danny Gottlieb is at the top of that list of drummers that I played with that are like that.
Love Danny.
Great.
We can geek out on New York and boy, I just maybe a moment of silence for 48th Street, because that was the first place that I went. All the music, so Sam Ash and Manny's and Rudy's and all that. But so you moved to New York from Washington. When you said Washington, I was going to say Jack Cassidy, because he is from Washington.
Oh God. And I've got a Jack Cassidy story for you too at some point, if we have time permitting.
Okay.
But, what happened was, my family is from New York City, and my dad got a job with the Labor Department. He was working with the state Labor Department in New York, and then he was hired by the the federal Labor Department. So they moved to Washington in 47. I was born in 53. So, and then in 1966, my dad got a call from then Mayor Lindsay to move to New York to head up one of the new super agencies for manpower and career development, which was my dad's chosen field. So when we moved back, I was just a couple of weeks shy of turning 13. So that's how I ended up in New York.
Okay. Well,
the relatives.
Not a bad place to grow up musically.
Well, you got that right.
Well, when did you start playing music? Was it when you were in Washington or when you were in New York?
When I was in Washington, I took piano lessons and hated them so much that I would tape record myself practicing, and play it so that my mom would think I was practicing, because the piano was downstairs.
Somebody else told me that, and it reminded me of a commercial we used to have. There was a store in Detroit called Highland Appliance. And it was for it was for the store, or it was for Highland Appliance. And there was a boy that did that, and then he picked up a football and climbed out the window. And his name was Jonathan in the commercial. And his mother's in the kitchen on the phone. No, Jonathan can't come out and play. He's practicing the piano. And it's people that rely on exact sound reproduction need to go to Highland Appliance, or maybe it was like a co-op with Memorex tape or something like that. But
yeah, this was, believe me, in the early 60s, it was not 96K.
By the way, shame on you. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. But the bigger joke was that the piano itself was a beige Steinway. I kid you not. It was a Steinway, and it was painted this horrendous shade of beige, and was a terrible piano, even though Steinways are Steinways, So I had zero appreciation of it at the time.
Well, I don't know anything whatsoever about your mother, but she was no dummy.
Very tolerant. They both should receive Purple Hearts after what musicians put them through,
So what happened after the piano phase?
So what happened then it was my brother's clarinet that I inherited and started playing a bit. And I ended up in school orchestras. The first day of seventh grade, we all sat down in the band room, and I sat down in the first chair, third chair, first section, and worked my way all the way up to last chair, third. I was an awful clarinetist.
Work your way up. Huh? Okay.
Exactly. Worked my way up to the end. But then it was very weird because I ended up, they said, listen, we need somebody to play alto clarinet. We have one. It's Montgomery County, Maryland school systems. And then all of a sudden I was in demand because I was the only guy silly enough to pick up this instrument. So my average clarinet skills were good enough for this. You know what I mean? But then it was the fascination. I've always been fascinated with drums. So a guy across the street from us, Peter Scheiberg, had a set of drums. I would go over there and I wasn't beating on him. I had, for some reason, I had the ability and the propensity to be a drummer, which I still am, and love it to pieces. As a matter of fact, most of everything the reasons I wanted to play bass are more from being a drummer than being the subsequent guitar player that I was for a long time, from like age 12 all the way up to like age 21. In the Hendrix Clapton tradition, I tried to be the very best, and I was in a lot of bands. And then I went to my cousin's wedding, started talking to the club date band, the function band, and that's what I started to do. I started to be the proud Mary evil ways guy in wedding bands. And they said, listen, it's great that you know how to do this. I think you should study guitar. Okay, so I started studying with guitar, jazz guitar with guys. Didn't have much interest in it until I started studying with, do you know the name Ira Newborn?
Yes. Well,
he was my first guitar teacher. I mean, best known for writing film scores, and we're still good friends to this day. And he said, listen, I said, what's that? He goes, well, it's my bass. It's a Telecaster bass. And I picked it up, and it started to make complete sense to me. And on these gigs, playing electric bass was a compulsory double if you were a guitar player. So you only played rock guitar and sang, and the keyboard player would pound out the left octave of his Farfisa Fast 4 or whatever he had at the time. This was 73, 74, 75, or left hand on the Cordovox. And I started saying, wait a minute, I'm playing the wrong instrument. And I had this epiphany when I was 20. Wow. So the fact that your site focuses on over 50, I think I'm sort of like falling right into the realm of, no, I was not a tennis prodigy when I was 3 or a ballet prodigy when I was 2. You know what I mean? I started late, which, to your point of, if you start late, so what? I started kind
of late too, but you mentioned Jeff Andrews, and I also see you studied with Homer Minch?
I did. When I was here's what happened with that.
Was that classical and upright and yes, and Simandl probably and all that?
Yeah. He was actually he converted me from German bow to French bow, but Homer Minch and I got along like oil and water.
Really?
I mean, a lot of his students were like, principal bass of the New York City Opera, principal bass of the Chicago Symphony. And I would come in, and his comment to me over and over was like, Jeff, your fingers are like lightning. They never strike twice in the same place. Well, and I studied with Homer because I studied with Clyde Lombardi, who passed away. And Clyde Lombardi was one of Homer's flagship students. He's actually very well documented and recorded in the bebop era in New York, and then became, studied with Homer, became a heavy legit guy, and was like New Jersey Symphony and all of the jobbing freelance orchestras in New York.
Are we still allowed to use that word? Legit?
Jobbing?
No, legit.
Well, I think your audience will know.
Because that used to offend a lot of people. I said, why is it? Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. We should.
Okay, then you know what? Maybe if you want to be, to your point, we can call them Arco-Americans.
I can't believe I never heard that before.
I just made it up. It's probably from working with you here today.
Consider it stolen. Like Homer mentioned, I interviewed Christian McBride at least a couple
Oh my
of
God.
times, and he studied with Homer Mensch at Juilliard, I believe. I mentioned Homer Mensch because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, you're kind of all over the place, and I mean that in a loving, kind way. I mean,
Thank you.
You're diversified. You cite among your influences Lee Dorman. That's Iron Butterfly. In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Okay.
Yep.
Jeff Beck, Tommy Shannon, George Mraz. Who are you, man?
I'm trying to be as good as everybody I've ever heard that moved me to do this. Now, if you listen to a track from, okay, now I'm going to catch the heat of a lot of people out there, but I really liked Iron Butterfly. But when I went to middle school and high school, the band I was in was referred to as the In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida Boys from Queens.
I would wear that like a badge of honor.
Well, but Lee Dorman, I mean, if you listen to a track like Soul Experience or In the Time of Our Lives, there is extremely busy yet really accompanying style bass, and with a big, beautiful, fat sound. I don't know if it was the P bass he was using then, because they had a Vox endorsement at the time, but I don't know if he recorded with those instruments or not. And I'm not even sure if he really was a scholar like a Marcus Miller kind of guy. You know what I mean? He just played what he played, and a lot of it was running lines that were in one position, like, if you're playing 1-3-4, like upright fingering, it's, you're spanning
1-2-4, you mean, right?
Or 1-2-4, thank you. You'd be like everything that was in the position between on the A string, the A, the B flat, and the B natural, and there were all the notes in there, but playing really great, like pentatonic accompaniment, and of course I didn't know what it was then, but I can tell you that it was great. I'd be happy to send you some tracks for you to investigate on your own if you're interested.
Just a bit of trivia. Do you know what the original title of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida was? You know what it was supposed to be?
In the Garden of Eden.
That's right.
And do you know this? Do you know that what is on the record was the rehearsal?
I didn't know that.
Don Casal, the engineer, pressed record for the rehearsal. At Ultrasonic Studios in Hempstead, New York. I actually did gigs there. I actually did recording there.
That's funny.
I have a lot of, I guess you probably have figured out that I have a lot of retention for really unimportant stuff.
That's what my mother says about me. Every unimportant thing in the world.
Awesome.
My wife says, you can remember what Mo said to Curly in 1954, but you can't remember what I said to you 10 minutes ago.
Sounds familiar. The Isle of Rum Boogie.
I said, darling, Curly died in 1952. It did not help my case.
Well,
where were we? So I mentioned a whole big, long list of people, and there are some people that are on that list that I've also played with. I did a ton of shows with Eddie Fisher on my MP.
God.
And I toured with Cleo Lane.
Okay, cool.
I did the national tour of Into the Woods.
Into the Woods was, Sondheim.
Yeah, he came to the rehearsals.
That's a tough score. Was Bernadette in that tour?
No, this was, I think Bernadette did on Broadway, but this was the national tour.
Right. I wonder if she did that as well.
We played all the Fox theaters, and we played Heinz Hall in Pittsburgh, and we played some really cool places.
Was that upright only, or was it a double?
Oh, it was upright only.
Yeah. Well, cool.
That one. Yeah. I was hired as a local guy, and the musical director liked me and invited me to do the national tour.
Who was it?
Randy Booth.
I know Randy Booth.
What is keeping you busy these days, Jeff?
What is keeping me busy? Well, since March of 19, I've been living in St. Augustine, Florida.
Okay.
And it was the right move at the right time to get out of the Northeast. And I am playing live here, and I'm also working online a lot as, production, bass tracks, drum tracks, mixing, composing. I've written a fair amount of stuff for libraries, and I was the lead composer on the Case with Paul Azan for a while, which is a Discovery show. So fortunately, that gift keeps on giving, as do some of my other things, because these days are a whole new ball of wax. And I play live with a couple of things. I'm playing right now with a guitarist named who just moved to our area, an old friend from New York named Rusty Philippus. And Rusty Philippus is a tremendous jazz, blues, call him what you want. And we play in a band together called Soul Pilot with a Y, P-Y.
Right.
And I also play weekly with Rick Levy, who tours with the Box Tops. And it's an acoustic guitar 8-string bass duo. And the cool thing about that gig is that we play all the music I grew up with. I mean, it's everything from Beau Brummels to the Hollies to Nancy Sinatra to Elvis. And we just go in there and bang it out Northeast style with no rehearsal. And we have a very, very loyal following of people that are older than us and at various stages of infirmity and functionality. And that 3 hours a week means everything to them.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about your gear. And if you can give us maybe the Reader's Digest condensed version, because I know you've got probably at least one or two of everything.
You know what? I have one of two of everything because stuff gets, when stuff becomes unplayable, I'd rather have a backup. Instead of buying like a $4,000 or $5,000 bass, I would buy a $400 bass or a $200 eBay special and soup it up. Get the right guys to soup it up, which is what Roger Sadowski did for me for many years before he started exclusively building his own stuff.
So I assume you have a P bass and
the best P bass I have right now, of all the P basses I've ever had, the best P bass I have is an Ibanez Roadstar 2 that had various different bodies to it. It had the PJ body originally. I found several of them out on the road, and I got rid of that body and got just a P bass body off of eBay that's got a DiMarzio P bass thing. I'm a DiMarzio artist, so I swear by everything they've made. They're extreme problem solvers, and I like the extra mid-range and sheer volume that they put out. They really work for me. They record well for me. They just are excellent for what I need them to do. So I have a fretless and a fretted Ibanez Roadstar 2 that are P bass configured. My other passionate basses are, I have 3 Hondo 8-string basses. The first one I got at the old Guitar Center in LA. And then my other passion as far as basses are concerned, I have 3 Gibson EB3Ls. A lot of people criticize the Mudbucker, but that's the sound I'm looking for. If I need to change anything, I do it on the way in with a Tech 21 product like the Bass Compactor or a old Fishman Bass Platinum DI that I like a lot to use, because I'm in a position a lot of using house gear, especially when I was touring. And if you can't get the amp you want, if you have the sound you want with a DI, you can always go into the effects return and still give the house what they need, and then get closer to getting your sound without dealing with an amp preamp that you may not like too much.
But you mentioned Tech 21. Talk to me a little more about that, because I've never heard a bad thing about the products or the people.
They make very, very cool stuff. I had met them years ago through Lloyd Schwartz, who was their artist guy. May he rest in peace. We were good friends through other people, like Lloyd and a great bass player in New Jersey named Paula Bruton went to high school together. And then we would all just hang at Sun Sound on Coney Island Avenue. And then it's years later, and Lloyd hooked me up with the company, and thus meeting Dale. So I'm Dale, who's also great, and her brother, Dale Crevens. Her brother, Skip Crevens, is a world-class pedal steel guitar player. So they've been great with me. I have a lot of their stuff. I mean, before I was even one of their artists, the Bass Driver DI, one of the first ones, was an essential thing to have for New York studio work. it was the fixer, no matter what bass you had. And I have a bunch of Squire, Protone Squire 5 strings with Ken Smith pickups in them because they had the adjustable pole pieces. And, they were always fixers. Always got the job done.
What about a Sans amp? I don't think you even mentioned that. Do you use that as well?
These were Sans amps, more or less. Like the Bass Driver DI has a Sans amp circuit in it, or at least the bass version of it, as does the bass, the little bass thing. I can't think of it's designed for flying. It's got some things on it. Very indispensable tool. And they had the Sans amp circuit into it, which would add a lot of the higher, more aggressive Doug Pinnick kind of things. And as a matter of fact, Doug Pinnick is also got a signature line of stuff.
Yes, very well aware of that.
I'm sure you are, but I'm not sure if all of your listeners are.
Yeah, gotcha. I want to talk about, you heard me at the very beginning. A lot of people think they're too old or it's too late to learn bass. And I've attracted a lot of people, mostly men. We do get a fair bit of women, but mostly men in their 50s, 60s, 70s, sometimes even older. They want to learn bass. And they're also not concerned about the New York freelance world. They're not trying to become pros at it. They want to just play. A lot of them don't even want to play with other people. A lot of them just like to play with themselves, with records, or just I should say by themselves, not with themselves.
But I'm bummed. Never a drummer around when you need one.
But also the things that happen to our bodies when we get up into those age ranges, arthritis and tendonitis and aching back, and a lot of people recovering from surgeries. Not like I'm running a geriatric ward, but I'm just trying to paint a picture just to give you some context. And the reason I mention all that is to ask you, now that you know the people that we're working with, I want to ask what advice you have for those people who in those kinds of situations that want to learn to play bass. What do you think they should be thinking about? What do you think they should know?
Well, I'm going to give you a perspective and also ask you questions to help clarify what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that after years and years and years of doing things that they didn't want to do to make a living, that if not now, when? They want to do this. And also, to your point before of, whatever physical limitations they have or haven't, they don't necessarily want to play continuum, and they don't necessarily want to play Donald Lee. They want to play the music that got them interested in this in the first place. So they want to play whipping post. They want to play paperback rider. Am I right about this?
Absolutely, right on.
Or do they want to, they don't want to necessarily do a deep dive into the mechanics of the instrument if it's not going to serve their initial desire to replicate what they heard when they were kids.
But a lot of them do want to learn theory and circle of fifths and their modes and all those kinds of things. But my whole thing is, do you know what you're supposed to do with all those notes in order to groove, in order to make music? But they embrace that, most of them.
And you know what? To your point, again, if they learn all of those things that we learned and what I learned, in my case, all it did was help me play anything I wanted to play better. It just made me knowledgeable of what I was playing. Like when I learned how to read, I was already doing, weddings and jobbing gigs. And because I was forced into sight reading, these different acts, it was like, oh, so that's what Rockabye Your Baby with a Gypsy Melody looks like. Oh, that's an E. Oh, here's an E. What do you know? You know what I mean? So it was all chicken, egg, chicken to me. There was no real rules other than when I started doing a deeper dive into it. So if one of your students, if your students, of advancing age, if they want to play Day Tripper, they're going to understand that the first note is a tonic and the second note is the minor third and the third note is the major third. That's going to give them just, guess what I know? I know more than when I was 13 and trying to learn this. So that would be my guess, that that has a lot to do with the picture, that they just want to be able to, as adults, articulate it and maybe explain it to other people the way you explained it to them, John.
Explain what to them
The
exactly?
mechanics. I mean, the things you're teaching them, all the, theory, circle of fifths, reading, all these things you're teaching are becoming a, I know something you don't know, to their pals once they've learned it from you.
Gotcha.
And establishing entire conversations about music, gear, other musicians. I'm sure that a lot of students, when they're coming to you, these bass students are talking about the other musicians that prompted these bass players that they grew up with to play what they played. And they probably all went online searching out the Greg Lakes and the Jack Cassidys and all of these people, because now they can talk the talk that is not the same as trying to play 3/5 of a mile in 10 seconds by just listening to Bless Its Pointed Little Head. You know what I mean? They can tell the difference between the lines, and some of them, I bet, can even write it out if they want to.
Yeah, I encourage that also in my digital course, Power Grooving.
Excellent.
I have a download called All You, and it's nothing but a chord chart with staff paper. Try writing out your own. And some of them like tabs, some of them don't like tabs. So I've got versions with tab, versions without tab, but it's all about grooving. I make my scales groove. The other thing is for these people, you don't have to be an acrobat. You don't have to be Victor Wooten or Stu Hamm. You know how much of an impact you can make with a super simple bass line. And trust me, nobody is going to turn around and say, hey, play more notes. Hey, play busier. If you just give it what it needs. And as Lee Sklar always says, serve the song, bow down to the song.
I knew that name was going to come up. And the other names that should come up are people like, even though Pino Palladino is known for, his fretless work, his work with John Mayer was tremendous. Yeah. Instead of having that fretless music man, now he's playing a P bass, and him and Steve Jordan sounded like one guy playing behind, and you're also talking about, in my opinion, semantics being important. You're talking about musicians that play the bass as opposed to bass players. You're talking about fully formed guys that no matter what instrument they picked up, they would sound like them. And that's how I feel about certain innovators like Jeff Beck. I don't think it's fair to just limit Jeff Beck in the context of him being a guitar player.
I've always felt that way about Paul McCartney.
Exactly.
What would you be if you weren't a bass player? Something outside of music.
Outside of my mother, you should have been a lawyer, you should have been a doctor. No. Now, you know what, recently, when I started thinking about it, a comedy writer or a radio DJ. I could clone all of those guys, but I got talked out of being on the college radio station because of a speech thing I have where I say my CHs very hard. Ch-ch-ch. So they psyched out the 17-year-old, 18-year-old me, and I didn't continue it. So you're talking about why I'm all over the map. And you know what? So are you, because we just like all this stuff.
Sure.
We just like it. And as musicians, it's our obligation, if we feel like it, to replicate it. So I wouldn't call myself a this player or a that player, because everything I've ever listened to has, gotten me to the point I'm at right now.
There's so much I could ask you about, and just, picking I should put all those names I listed at the beginning and pull them out of a hat and just, say, oh, tell me about this one. There must be a story about this one. So maybe we'll do a follow-up interview. But
I'd love to. It's been a real pleasure working with you.
This has been great work, and this is work. Yeah.
No, but you know what I mean? It's just the, and I think that even with the glut of product that's out there, if you take time to seek out the individuals and their accomplishments like yourself and the things that you're doing that other people are not thinking of, if they do a deeper dive into you, they're going to get it. And some people don't want to get it. They want to slap the bass and tap as fast as they can. And I never consider myself in those Olympics.
This has been absolutely fascinating, Jeff. Thank you so much for doing this. And
well, thank you for asking. I hope I didn't take you, like I said before, digress with you too much here. But you just sort of led me in all these directions, you know.
I'm no less guilty than anyone for doing that. So we can go down all kinds of paths. But why don't we just put an end to this one? We want to save some stuff for the follow-up interview. Maybe we'll even do that in person.
That'd be awesome. That would be awesome. And thank you again for asking. It was really a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. The honor is mine. Keep doing what you're doing. And thanks for all the great music.
And back at you, sir.
Thanks so much. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. You know, a lot of people think they're too old or it's too late for them to learn how to play an instrument. I started ForBassPlayersOnly.com for people over 50 who want to play bass because I believe you're never too old and it's never too late to experience the joy and the pleasure of making music. ForBassPlayersOnly.com. That's what we're all about. Thanks again to our special guest this week, Jeff Ganz. I'm John Liebman. We'll see you all right here next week at ForBassPlayersOnly.com. In the meantime, let's play bass.